So here we are, the last talk of the day before the event. And we're all going to build a native app, right? Well, I don't know if these lights or... Anyway, so I don't know if how many of you were in the previous session, but there's another picture of me on a cruise ship. My name's Brian, and I'm from Boston, and I'm helping, we're working with Firely to kind of bring Firely's products to the States. But us in Boston, we're primarily app developers, and so we do full stack development, web apps, desktop apps, and mobile apps. And we do a lot of it in the kind of Node JavaScript ecosystem. And this talk now is going to introduce us to React Native, in which if you're inclined and willing and want to, you can, even on your own computer, build a mobile app that you could install on your phone by the time we leave, which gives us 10 minutes then to get on the bus to go to the ice skating rink. So let's try and do all of that. The two things I wanted to introduce everyone to are React Native. So it's a project that's part of the React ecosystem, and the whole thing is you use React and JavaScript to create an app, and then it has the machinery to compile it into a native app for both Android and iOS. You can also make progressive web apps, and you can use React Native to create apps for the Windows desktop as well. The other tool we're using, just because I didn't want to have anyone have to install anything on their computer, is a tool called Expo. So Expo is a framework that runs with React to help create React apps. And that's what we're going to be developing our native app in. You don't have to use Expo if you're creating a React Native app. You can certainly just use React Native straight up. We're doing that on a project because we needed to access some of the libraries that Expo doesn't let you access. And I guess the other thing to point out is that this is not using any of the health kit or any of the kind of native APIs in these phone apps. This is going to query directly from a Fire server into your phone. So we're not using any of the stuff like the Apple folks showed us. This is a different strategy for pulling that stuff in. So the first thing is, if you're interested, and I'll wait a minute, if everyone who wants to do this exercise can go to this. I should have done the barcode. Oh, that wouldn't have worked. You have to type this on your computer, and if you could sign up for a free account at Expo. And I'm going to wait until 44. So if everyone does this, step one, we will all have installed the tools we need to make our native app. And if anyone has any problems, I think you just need a username and password. So hopefully it's not too problematic. And as we're doing that, the code for this, I'll put a link at the end. The actual Git repository that we're going to be using is available that you could download locally, and if you wanted to continue development on this app and not use the web-based tools to write code, that's an option too. So is anyone having problems or still need some more time to sign up? It's hard to see no hands. Okay, so the next thing, if you're inclined and you want to, the app has an emulator that has like a time limit, so only so many people can do it at once without paying. There's a web one that you can use, or if you really want, and this is kind of the fun part, is both for Android and iOS, look for the tool that installs on your phone. And what this will do is the app will run on your phone in a native way. And as we make updates, it'll live update your phone. It's pretty cool. So if you're inclined and want to, go ahead to your app store, Google Play, and look for the Expo app, or follow this link on the Expo webpage. Once you get that app installed on your phone, I'll wait another minute or two where I'll actually get into the exercise. This won't publish the tool into an app store or any of the test flight stuff that you would need to do to actually have it not run within the Expo frame on your phone. To do that, you have to get set up in the stores with proper developer accounts, so that's kind of not reasonable for this kind of talk. But this will get us almost to that point. And if you wanted to, you could take this app and continue to develop it on your own. Okay, anyone need more time installing the app on their phone if they want to? Okay, so the step 3 is to profit. No. So what we're going to do is you should have an app if you've set up your Expo and signed in. It gives you kind of a random name. What we're going to first do is click on this ellipsis and then import Git repository. So if anyone is, and this is the web-based app, obviously, so this is me signed in to snack. Sorry, I guess I should type in, the first thing is the snack.expo.io. So this is kind of a sandbox to produce apps on the Expo platform. So if everyone goes to snack.expo.io and they're signed into Expo, you should see a screen like this. Is anyone having trouble finding this? Okay, so the next step is we're going to import a Git repository. So I pre-made a lot of the boilerplate and a couple of screens to show us all an example of what we might build. So if we go to import Git repository, you should see a dialog like this. And once you do, go ahead and this is all one line, so don't new line it, but I tried to do this in a way that would be easy to type in. This is the Git repo of the app that we're going to be using. This is also the Git repo that you could clone locally if you wanted to install the command line tools and not develop through the web browser. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and type that in and then press the OK button. And when you're done, it might take a minute or two to install. You should see something that looks like this. So there's a bunch of directories here. This is bringing in kind of a stock Expo starter React kit that we put a couple screens in to just get things going. Is that working for everyone? Does anyone not have it working that wants to have it working? Because I'll ask Junaid here, my colleague from Boston, to walk over and help you. Keep him awake. Okay, I'm not going to get deep into React. This isn't a React tutorial. Are you having problems? Or are you guys all set? Everything's okay? Okay, cool. So if you're interested in this ecosystem, I would encourage you to learn how React works. The same conventions work in React Native. The components are a bit different because they're not web target components, they're native target components, but there's a very similar feeling between the two, which is really nice, especially if you're building up dev teams, and we know that that this ecosystem of JavaScript and React is growing. It's an opportunity because you can find development talent. People, especially newer in the field, tend to like these tech stacks, so they enjoy doing their jobs. But this is not so much about React Native, but more about using React Native to build a health app. So we're using kind of functional components, and if you don't know what that means, it's kind of like the newer trend in creating React components. So app.js is our main app, and this is pretty much boilerplate. This is a loading screen, and when you do the kind of Expo create React startup, you get stuff like this, so you don't really have to type much of this if you're starting from scratch. And we're setting up this app provider, so that's probably the first thing to look at. And the app provider is, so providers give context, so all of your components in React can share kind of state and information using a concept of a context and a provider in React speak. And so the app provider basically wraps a theme and then this patient context provider. And the patient context provider If we take a look at that, it's simply setting up our client library that we went over in the previous talk. So this is the same client library that if you were before, you can do all the things like that you would expect with a Fire client library, making a new object, and then also kind of just hard coding it to the smart health. So if you were going to do this as a smart app, you would have to use the React has this embedded web frame, so you can handle the OAuth 2 dance. That was a little bit much to try and cover in this sort of 40-minute, half-hour forum. So this is just hitting an open web server or an open Fire server. And so this also gives us a global kind of thing we're calling state in the patient context. And I'll show you how that's used in a moment. So when I look at them, we have 4 screens to this app, and they're over here. And if, by the way, I guess before we do this, if you want to run this on your phone and you've installed the phone app, there's this run button. And if you open the Expo app on your phone and scan whatever that is, I guess if you scan this one, you'll be using the app I'm showing you. Yeah, when you get it, you should see it on your phone. And it's at least working from one person. When you do that, you will be able to see the devices down here in this tab in this Expo. So right now I'm connected to Chrome. This is the frame over here on the left, the right. If you are using the Expo app, you should see that number would be 2, and it will show up there as well. And at least one person has that. So this has a home screen, and the home screen is basically doing using our client that we're storing in global state, which is the Fire client. We're doing a search for patients, and we're not doing any pagination, so we're just bringing back the first 50 patients that the server gives us. I'm taking the results, and I'm kind of doing some flattening of the data, and then I'm putting them into props for a component down here that makes this list. And so a couple things to point out here is we could have used FirePath here actually on lines 19 through 21, but we're using a Lodash here, kind of the get method, which is a similar idea where you can give it a path to get something out of it. But it's very common that I found an architectural pattern that components that you build, or if you have a client-server app where the server is like a web page, but you need to have a protected server API, it's very common to simplify the Fire modeling, because as an app developer, you might not need the deeply nested structure that Fire gives you, and sometimes it's just a pain to deal with that. So in this case, you can see we're flattening things down. Now sometimes you can't because your app might not need it, but for instance, you might just choose either the first name that the EHR gives you or the Fire server gives you, or you grab the first name with this particular use code and use that, and then just kind of forget about the rest of the structure. Maybe your app doesn't need all of that. And so the patient list, a lot of these components, we try to keep them very much in the standard. There's all sorts of React Native component libraries you can use out there. We're using the default one from React Native and then React Native Elements. So it's kind of a boring look and feel, but it's I didn't want to get kind of bogged down with fancy Material UI or whatever other component library of the week there is out there. And so this home page allows you to pick a patient, and as I pick a patient, you can see the bold one up there changes, and this is really just setting into state the patient that you've selected, and that patient that gets set actually goes all the way up to the context, so it's available throughout the app. So the first screen, if you look on your phone, is this medication screen. And the medication screen has a similar pattern. So this use effect block in React speak is like what loads whenever something changes like state. So when I set a new patient into state, this is now triggered everywhere so that it's kind of eagerly loading all of this stuff. Now you might decide to do different architectural patterns. So really what that means tangibly behind the scenes is every time I pick a new patient, it's asynchronously going out and doing the request for medications and conditions and observations so that when I tab over to that, it's already loaded. It's not doing it, it's doing it eagerly. Because I'm anticipating that the user is very interested in their medications and conditions and I don't want them to wait to see those load. But you might decide to implement it differently. And similar deal applies here. We're doing a simple search. We're constraining it by that patient ID. And our patient ID we've destructured from state. So state, again, is the global thing that's passed through our provider context. And then I'm getting the bundle back and I'm destructuring the entries from it. That's a medication request, right? I'm doing a fire query for medication request for that patient, and then I'm just doing some data munging to flatten it out so I have a couple properties that show up in this card. And so that's how that works. And if I switch to a different patient, I can see that there's, unless it's coincidence, there should be different medications. Maybe that's, I don't know if that should be working. Is anyone else having this work? Because actually it's not updating the patient. Is this a failure of the app? I'm just going to reload this, make sure I didn't do anything. What's that? Okay, so I'm not exactly sure. So this person has that medication. Yeah, I'm not, oh. I must have typed something wrong. Oh man, I don't know why I did that. Okay.
I had the same thing at first, but it just disappeared.
The problem disappeared?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me do a hard reload of everything. Hopefully that.
Don't have a loading indication.
Uh,
Tell whether it's still loading.
I swear this worked before I plugged in. This is not awesome. Okay, now it seems to be working. I'm not exactly sure why that error is there, but I'm seeing different drugs now. So I heard that some people over here got it working, so at least, yeah. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me. We're almost at the skating. So I've implemented medications and conditions, and if you notice, observations is not implemented. So I thought we would, as a group, hands on keyboard, maybe we all can type out getting the observations for this patient. And so I stubbed out that screen, so we can see that that screen is loaded. It's basic text observation screen, but it's not anything else. So the first thing that I would do here is we want to maintain the state of the observations. So I'm going to do some Stack Overflow style programming here. And thanks. And put in, so this is a standard pattern in React using state to manage things. This pair is the thing that you want to, the variable effectively that you want to reference, and this is the setter function. And I'm initially setting it to null. I'm pulling in patient context because I need to destructure my patient ID and my state from that context, just like before. So that would be the first step. And now I have a place to put my resulting observations, and I know what I have access to my Fire client, and I have access to the patient ID that was selected from the beginning screen. So the next thing I want to do is basically pull in this code that's doing this. This is kind of like component did load from the class-based React things. So this is going to now, instead of searching for medications, I want to search for observations. And the observation, I'm giving it the patient ID. And just to be, so I'm coherent about this, I'm gonna, the entry in this bundle now is observations. So these are my observations. And now I'm gonna map them and create an array this is where I go through and kind of flatten out the structure I'm getting back. So if I do this, each of these items is a singular observation. So now what I want to do is I'm going to reuse this card. I'm not going to create a new component. So this card has these properties: title, onset, and status. So this is a common tab to have open, is the Fire website. And I'm going to just look over the observation resource. And so since I made this component have title, onset, and status, I think the title makes sense to have the display text of the code for the concept. That's the observation that happened. So I'll take my observation, and I'm going to go through in the bundle. This is a search bundle, so the root of it is a resource. So I'm going to look at the resource dot. In this case, it's just called code.text. Onset, I think, is called effective in this one, so effective date time. We're going to pull that in. And I know the data because it's Cynthia data, so I know it's not using period or any of the other kind of choice types. And then this is going to be, and then, oh, I did that wrong. That was status. I usually type my code in Vim on Tmux, so I'm new to this heavyweight graphic editor. So I apologize for my typing speed. The status is status, so that kind of maps straight. So now I have these things here, and I'm accumulating with map this list of POJOs that have title, onset, and status. And I'm using the shorthand object notation here. I'm sorting by the date so that the new ones show up first. And then at the end, in my kind of thenable, I'm going to set my observations to the observations. So the observations are, I'm calling set observations, which is an asynchronous React thing that uses my state up here to set my observations. So now I have all of that. The next step is to actually display it. So again, I'm going to go back to my medication request, and you can see let me see. Right, the content. I'm looping, and I guess I could have done this maybe in one. Anyway, I'm looping around the content here, and creating a React component called styled card. We can look at what that styled card is, but it basically takes these props in. Here's styled card. So styled card has. And this is an example of pulling in a very popular Node library called Moment to make the time formatting a lot simpler. So if I go back to my observations, instead of this observation screen, I want to put in the styled card component. except I'm going to call it observations content. I don't know why I called this issue. I'm not going to change that name because it really doesn't matter. It's a little confusing, I admit. And then the only other thing I'm changing is the key needs to be unique across the React app just because it has a very sophisticated way. It knows how to update the components in the DOM, or in this case, the DOM-like thing. So I just am making a key of the patient ID and the title of the observation. And then the last piece would be to return this scroll view with some logic that just shows the observations. If there's observations, then I call my method. And this is how you bind to that state. So if the state changes, and then so now, look at that. This was actually the first time I wrote this code, and it worked. Just saying. So anyway, here's the observations. So we've all, I think, implemented medications, conditions, and observations. And with any luck, if you've got it synced up properly to your phone app, you should be able to see that on your phone app as well. Yeah, so the point here is that there's libraries out there. This is also if I had a paid account, or I wait for my position here, or maybe it's going down fast enough, maybe I will wait. This will launch an emulator, so this exact same code compiles down, will allow you to write one code path that works nicely on both platforms. Lots of companies use this. Airbnb is still using React Native to make their app. There's some performance things, but I think if you're at Airbnb scale, you could probably afford to kind of write it twice. But anyway, that's that. I don't have that much more unless there's questions, or if people want to hack their own thing, I'd be happy to walk around and we can add a graph maybe. Just kidding. Or we could talk more about this kind of ecosystem. Or we could wait 2 positions in the queue and see what it looks like on an Android phone. Anyone have any thoughts or feedback? Here it is. Here's the Android app. So here's what it looks like on Android now. Now I just have to figure out how to make it. There we go. So now I can. So this is the same code running on Android, as well as the old paywall. Gotta love it. And the same thing will compile and run on Apple. So I think this is a nice way, especially when you're a company that's prototyping a new idea, to be able to have it work in both platforms. It's definitely falls in line with their keynote speaker talking about small teams, especially when you're bootstrapping. But this also scales. Big organizations use this technology stack as well. So it's not like only for startups or for prototypes. And in one position, we will see it on iOS. I imagine everyone's doing this right now, so that's why we have this queue. So there it is on iOS. And I have, well, so it looks like some other people are connecting to this too. But anyway, that's pretty much all I was hoping to cover. I hope that you all have an iOS or Android app of your own now that can show basic conditions, observations, and medications for Cynthia patients. I have 10 minutes left. So we can either talk for 10 minutes or we can just, yeah. No one is saying anything, so, oh,
When does the bus leave for the skating?
45, I think.
So we have time.
We have time, so if you want to make something, go ahead. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So I thank everyone for their time, and I hope that this quick whirlwind introduction of React Native was fun, and that you got it working. And if you didn't, come see me, and I can maybe help you out. Thanks, everyone.